Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Diory Rabajante, and I am pursuing a PhD in law at Goethe University Frankfurt, where I am part of the research training group Standards of Governance. My research dwells on what I call the private charges of online speech and the use of private adjudicatory mechanisms in content related issues in online platforms. Today, I will talk about the judicialization of online content governance, as well as its dark sides. With judicialization of online content governance, I refer to the prevalence of quasi-judicial approach or the judicialized style or judicialesque approach in governing online speech, such that decisions on online content-related issues are made by private actors, including the online platforms, in the shadow of judicial processes. This topic bears relevance to the theme of the pre-conference, Global Justice, Technology, and Integrated Research, because judicializing online speech governance would involve the integration of legal standards and quasi-judicial mechanisms into the architecture of the online platform's content moderation systems. Over the years, online platforms have shifted from relying on mere vibes to a formalistic, procedural, legalistic, and quasi judicial approach in addressing issues with user generated content. In the early days of online platforms, they would take down a post based on mere gut check, such that if a post makes one feel bad, then that post must be taken down. And this has changed over the years as the volume of online content and the number of platform users all over the world rapidly increased. Online content governance is now rules based, or at least seeks to be rules based, and adopts procedural mechanisms similar to that of a legal system in order to provide procedural justice. The decisions on whether or not to take on a post involve the application of legalistic rules and reasoning and are becoming more and more judicialized. As Kate Klonick explained in her article, The New Governors, content moderators now act very much like judges. Judges are trained to apply the laws. In the same manner, content moderators are trained to apply the platform's internal rules. One of the examples of this judicialization is the creation of the Meta Oversight Board, sometimes described as the Facebook Supreme Court, which serves as an appellate body for content-related decisions on Facebook and Instagram. There are also regulations that embrace privatized judicialization as an approach. A perfect example of that would be the EU Digital Services Act, or the DSA, which provides for various procedural mechanisms. Under Article 17 of the DSA, for example, platforms are mandated to provide a clear and specific statement of reasons for their decisions, as courts do in their decisions. Article 20 of the DSA requires platforms to provide an internal complaint handling system, while Article 21 of the DSA provides for the possibility of out-of-court dispute settlement before certified out-of-court dispute settlement bodies or independent third parties that would resolve disputes relating to decisions taken by online platforms. In India, the IT rules also embrace this judicialization as an approach. The IT rules of India require that the platforms should designate a grievance officer to address complaints. And the person aggrieved of the grievance officer's decision will have an opportunity to appeal such decision to a government-formed grievance appellate committee. All of these examples show a trend toward a procedural and adjudicatory turn in governing online speech. And there is an allure to this procedural and adjudicatory turn, to this judicialization of online content governance. Judicialization gives a semblance of legitimacy to the online platform's system of governance. First, Providing users an opportunity to complain and pursue an appeal means providing them access to justice. Therefore, it is arguable that judicializing content governance serves the ideals of the rule of law and due process. Second, requiring platforms to provide well-reasoned decisions in content-related matters gives assurance that the decisions on the content are not arbitrary. It guarantees predictability and consistency of rulings. Accordingly, it helps build confidence and trust in the platform's systems of governance. Third, using adjudication in deciding content-related matters would, in the words of Lon Fuller, grant the affected party a form of participation that involves the opportunity to present proofs and reasoned arguments. Thus, adjudication helps elevate the normative discourses on the exercise of online speech with the meaningful participation of the affected party, since it allows the presentation of proofs and reasoned arguments. Finally, it is very difficult to have a consensus on a universal substantive standard for free speech. It seems easier to agree on the procedural safeguards than on the type of speech or content that should or should not be allowed online. However, we must recognize that the judicialization of online content governance also has dark sides, which we should not ignore. The first dark side of this judicialization is that it could lead to procedure washing. On one hand, the focus on procedural safeguards than on the substantive standards of free speech gives a semblance of viewpoint neutrality. But on the other hand, it tends to reduce the concept of justice to mere procedural and court-centric conception of justice. It can mislead one to believe that a decision based on unjust rules or community standards is fair, simply because procedures were complied with. And this amounts to what Evelyn Douek calls a process theater. Transposing offline judicial processes and the offline notion of due process to online content governance creates the illusion of a fair process in the digital sphere, even though, along the way, certain systemic problems were ignored. And this leads me to my next point. The second dark side of this judicialization of online content governance is that it tends to disregard and even legitimize systemic inequalities. Judicialization can act like the opium of online users. By providing procedural safeguards, judicialization makes the online users feel better about the chaos in the digital sphere. The illusion of fairness and justice brought about by procedural safeguards prevents one from challenging systemic inequalities that are already embedded in content moderation systems. These systemic inequalities, which are often disregarded in the judicialization approach, include the geographic inequality in content moderation. While there is attention given to the frustrations of countries like France and Germany about problematic speech on the internet, the same attention is not extended to poorer countries. There is also this exploitation of cheap labor in global South countries, to which judicialization is blind. In addition, while the community standards of major platforms were largely shaped by the EU-based standards and US-based standards, there is a noticeable absence of input from the global South in the development of the platform's community standards. The marginalization of vulnerable communities that exist offline is being replicated online. And judicialization does not attempt to solve this problem or to rectify the systemic inequalities I mentioned because it is focused merely on an ex post individual review or a post by post review of content related decisions. Worse, judicialization can even reinforce these inequalities by reinforcing power disparities. The use of court like mechanisms and issuance of decisions in the shadow of judicial processes give a semblance of fairness and justice in the system, despite the presence of systemic injustice, despite the presence of power disparities. And now we see that tension wherein judicialization, which is supposed to be a remedy intended to bring justice, perpetuates injustice. And finally, the judicialization of online content governance raises questions about the role of democratic values and the propriety of privatization of justice in free speech issues. The reliance on quasi-judicial mechanisms implemented by private actors may lead to a form of insulation from democratic processes. Even though these private actors implement quasi-judicial mechanisms in compliance with government regulations, these private actors effectively act as the de facto private judges of online speech, and they make decisions about online content without direct input from democratic institutions. They do not only resolve content-related disputes, they also shape the formation of speech norms. They determine, they dictate the type of speech that should or should not remain online. Therefore, we should ask ourselves whether we truly want this privatized juristocracy in the governance of online speech. Before I end, let me clarify that I am not arguing that procedural safeguards and adjudicatory mechanisms do not matter. They do. However, since judicialization can act like the opium of online users and creates the danger of legitimizing systemic inequalities, we should be critical before we embrace judicialization as a means of achieving digital justice in the global digital ecosystem. While judicializing online speech governance may seem to have a transformative potential, as it seems to guarantee affected parties with access to justice, this approach focuses merely on individual cases, on individual posts, and therefore it can be blind to systemic injustices. If we fully embrace private judicialization without addressing its dark side, there is a danger that we would miss the forest for the trees. Thank you.